From Milwaukee's NPR, this is Capitol Notes. We break down the big political news affecting Wisconsin. I'm Chuck Quirmbach, filling in for Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com. Here's our latest conversation. Well, hi, J.R. Welcome to the Giving Thanks edition of Capitol Notes.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, one thing for which a lot of people are thankful is the state of Wisconsin's fiscal status seems to be in pretty good shape. There was a state report in the last few days. Is that right?
Yeah, so this is an exercise required every 2 years. It's basically the first big step for the upcoming budget. And what it does is it takes a look at the current biennium, which ends June 30th, and figures, okay, what do we think we're going to have in the bank at the end of this 2-year period? What do we think we're going to have in terms of revenue growth for the next 2-year period? And what did agencies ask for? And you add up all those numbers, we've got projected a $4 billion surplus at the end of this biennium, which is about $500 million more than they thought they were going to have. They expect $1.7 billion in new revenue growth over the next 2 years, and agencies asked for about $5.6 billion in new spending. Now, there are a couple of caveats to all that. There's also a few other exercises that kind of form an equation. If we funded every single agency request, which probably never happens in the budgeting process, but if we did, we'd still be $740 million in the hole. So that's a long story I won't get into, but basically it tells you agencies are asking for a lot, led by the State Department of Public Instruction. It wants $4.3 billion in new state money. The second thing is that calculation also assumes that the state would expand Medicaid. That is something that Tony Evers has tried to do in all three of his budgets. Republican lawmakers have blocked it. If you do that expansion, it would save about $1.7 billion in state money. Well, you don't do it, add that to the tab. So what I'm getting at is we got a lot of cash, a lot of demands. The question is, what's Evers going to propose come February, puts his budget together? What will lawmakers agree to? Because we've already heard from Republican leaders, they want to do tax cuts and not much else.
So speaking of those tax cuts, there was the second report last week from the Policy Forum that said Wisconsin's tax burden, the individual's tax burden percent of income they pay to taxes, is down. So will that kill any talk of additional tax cuts?
Oh, no. Republicans are still geared up. Their mantra has been give it back to the taxpayers, that they're being overtaxed. They want to see that money go back. And that gets at kind of this question, which looks ahead a little bit. What's going to happen with that money? So Evers, we expect the governor is going to propose, put money in education, the UW system, all these kind of priorities. We expect lawmakers to not want to spend that much as the governor at least want to put a lot of money into tax cuts. Back in 2021, remember, Governor Evers signed the tax cut Republicans pushed, then ran on it a year later as a tax cutter. So we don't know what the governor's going to do in 2026. That's a long ways from now. But would he maybe sign another tax cut Republicans authored and then run on it in 2 years? Or is Tony Evers thinking, hey, we had a decent night in November, even in a not great environment. The party and power in the White House tends to struggle. Midterm elections, maybe I should veto that tax cut and squirrel that money away, because then Democrats could win both houses of the legislature and I could win re-election, or some of the Democrats could win. And we'd have a lot of cash to go spend on our priorities. So there's lots of stuff to think about long term. But the near term thing is we're doing all right fiscally in Wisconsin. The question is, what are we going to do with that money when it comes budget time?
Well, reporters are always thankful when there's a good spirited budget battle and dollars and cents. So these things really matter. We're also thankful when there are elections on the board. And yes, we've just had some major ones, but Wisconsin has a couple coming up in late winter.
So we've got state Supreme Court and state public instruction. So first, state Supreme Court, open seat. Liberal Ann Walsh Bradley is retiring. That means control of the court is again up for grabs. I tallied more than $56 million spent on the race in 2023, which was almost 3 times the national record, the old national record. So, okay, Susan Crawford, Dane County Judge, Brad Schimmel, Waukesha County Judge, former Republican Attorney General. They're the 2 announced candidates at this point. Okay, how much are we going to spend this time? I don't mean to be flippant about it, but it's control of the court again. Like, it's a big deal. Think of what the Supreme Court's done the last couple of years, with control, a year and a half or so, with control of that court going to liberals and the big decisions they've had on the big issues they've tackled. It's at stake again. So what's going to happen there? Then 2, State Superintendent Jill Underly She's running for re-election. Now, she's got some critics over things like the fiscal situation with Milwaukee Public Schools and that not coming to light till after voters had approved a referendum, about test scores, these report cards that we're seeing, and whether she's softened the standards for students. But the state Democratic Party of Wisconsin, which has a lot of resources or can raise a lot of resources, endorsed Anna Lee for re-election and endorsed Susan Crawford in that open race. So that she's got a big backer in her corner. Question is, who's going to come forward? We've seen one person, a superintendent, I believe Jeff Wright's his name, run for state assembly before. Will we see a candidate who's more in line with the school choice and voucher program and charter schools type movement come forward? Maybe. But that race is going to be overshadowed by the Supreme Court contest, which is going to make it very interesting to how they can break through the noise and get attention come April, when the focus will be on who controls the state Supreme Court going forward.
Well, a big thanks to you, JR, and of course, thanks to our listeners for tuning in. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
Hey, same to you and your listeners.
That was J.R. Ross of WisPolitics.com speaking with me, WUWM's Chuck Quirmbach. Check out the Capitol Notes podcast wherever you get your podcasts.